The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Lena sat beside her father's hospital bed, his frail hand wrapped in hers. When Ivy, her half-sister, tossed the contract on the table with a smirk, Lena felt her world crack. Marry Damien Vale, the mute and feared heir to the Vale Empire, for 1 year, take Ivy's place as part of a deal struck in secrecy. He doesn't even care who he marries, Ivy had shrugged. He just wants someone obedient. Lena didn't ask why Ivy backed out. She only asked where to sign. The wedding was a blur of white and gray, a ceremony devoid of joy. Damien stood like a statue, his sharp suit perfect, his eyes unreadable. He gave a nod when prompted, signed his name in silence, and offered her his arm like an obligation. Lena saw no hatred in him, but no warmth either. She'd been warned about him. Cold, unpredictable, and dangerous when provoked. The press called him the Silent Storm. But Lena wasn't afraid. Not yet. That night, in the massive, echoing bedroom of the Vale estate, Lena tried to speak. "I know this wasn't your choice," she said, slipping off her wedding gown, vulnerable and trembling. "But I'll try to be a good wife." Damien had been watching her, expressionless. Then, with hands as steady as his voice was absent, he signed something to her. The interpreter nearby translated, "This is strictly business. You sleep on the couch." Lena curled on the expensive velvet couch, eyes burning. The silence in the mansion was louder than any scream. Her father was being kept alive with money she'd sold her soul for. And yet, here she was, discarded on her wedding night like a shadow. She didn't cry then. Not yet. The pain hadn't reached the surface. But her heart began to tremble. Outside, the city celebrated the union of power and grace. Inside, Lena shut her eyes and whispered a promise to herself. Survive this year. The mornings at the Vale estate began before dawn, structured like a fortress run by ghosts. Lena woke early, folded the couch's coverlet, and watched Damien from a distance as he sat by the windows, sipping coffee in silence, reading business reports. He never acknowledged her unless necessary, communicating only through brief, emotionless gestures or written notes when no interpreter was around. The staff followed suit, treating her like a formality, Mrs. Vale in name only. It was clear, she was a placeholder, a pawn. But Lena was used to being invisible. She'd grown up with Ivy stealing the spotlight and their mother's affection. She knew how to blend into the background.
She tried to make the best of it, setting the table, learning some basic sign language, offering Damien space. One day she mistakenly put cream in his coffee instead of milk. He stared at the cup for a long moment, then slid it off the table with a deliberate flick, shattering porcelain across the floor. Lena flinched. He didn't yell, he couldn't, but his expression said enough. He signed something sharply. The interpreter hesitated. He said, "If you can't even do this right, why are you here?" Lena swallowed her tears and cleaned in silence. It was the first time she truly feared him. But she also noticed other things, the way his fingers trembled when he opened letters, how he avoided physical touch even when bumping shoulders in the hallway, how he stood for hours at the window during thunderstorms, staring into the dark like he was waiting for something, or someone. One evening she saw him watching a home video on his tablet, a boy, Damien, as a child, laughing before the sound cut out. His mother's face flashed briefly before the screen went black. He slammed the device shut when he noticed her watching. Lena began journaling, just to stay sane. In those pages she confessed everything, her fear, her loneliness, her rage. But she also started writing about Damien, questions, observations, things she dared not say aloud. Why does he seem more sad than cruel? What happened to him? Why does the silence feel heavier around him than anyone else? One night, after days of barely speaking, Damien left a folded note on the edge of her pillow. 4 words, hastily scribbled. "Stay out of trouble." That was all. No signature, no kindness, But for Lena, it meant something. It meant he noticed. It meant there was more to the cold air than marble and silence. The days blurred into a cycle of silence and avoidance. Lena kept her head down, attending charity events as the obedient wife, while Damien remained a distant shadow. At home, the mansion whispered with secrets. Staff exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Doors closed just as she approached. Conversations halted mid-sentence. It was as if the very walls conspired to keep her in the dark. But Lena wasn't just surviving. She was listening. One evening, while searching for a book in the East Wing's neglected library, she stumbled upon a hidden door behind a shelf. Inside was a small room, dusty with abandonment. Papers littered the desk, letters, medical records, and therapy notes. Damien Vale, childhood trauma, selective mutism, depression. Auditory trauma after incident. Her hands trembled as she picked up a black and white photo. Damien, maybe 7 years old, smiling beside a woman who had to be his mother. Scribbled across the corner was a date, followed by the word gone. Lena barely had time to process before the sound of footsteps echoed behind her. Damien stood in the doorway, his eyes hard with betrayal. His signing was fast, sharp. Get out. His chest heaved, and though he made no sound, the room seemed to shake with his fury. You had no right. He turned away, before she could explain. Slamming the door behind him so violently, the shelves trembled. Lena pressed her back to the wall and wept quietly. Understanding now, he wasn't just cold. He was broken. That night, she left a note outside his room. I wasn't trying to invade your past. I just wanted to understand the man I married. I'm sorry. No response came. Days passed. He wouldn't look at her. She began to wonder if she had ruined everything. But then, at dinner one night, something changed. Damien signed slowly, his eyes avoiding hers. What did you see? She answered honestly, about the photo, the therapy notes, the silence that haunted the walls. And then, for the first time, his hands hesitated. She died screaming, he signed, and I couldn't hear her. Lena felt her heart crack open. No longer the ghost of a wife, she was now the only one who knew his most painful truth. The days grew longer as Lena felt the weight of the contract pressing on her chest. The anniversary of their union was approaching, and with it the ticking clock of her obligation. She had always known the marriage would end once the year expired, but the thought of leaving, of walking away from Damien, knowing the depths of his pain, made her hesitate. She couldn't explain why it mattered so much. They weren't in love. She wasn't supposed to care. But as weeks passed, something unspoken between them began to shift. After their emotional confrontation in the library, Damien became almost tentative. He no longer shut himself off entirely. When they sat together at the dinner table, he would catch her eye, only to look away quickly, his lips pressed in a thin line. The staff noticed too. Whispers flickered in corners, though they never dared say it aloud. Something had changed, but Lena couldn't tell if it was a crack in Damien's armour or just a fleeting moment of vulnerability. Then came the day that everything unravelled. Lena's half-sister, Ivy, arrived unannounced at the mansion, her beauty and charm radiating as always. She breezed in as if nothing had changed, all smiles and soft words for the family. Ivy had never cared about Damien, never wanted him, not in any real way. But she wanted the empire, the power. And she made it clear that she wasn't just visiting. No, Ivy was here to remind Damien of the contract that had bound their families together for years, even though Lena was the one who had signed it. "I thought the arrangement was temporary," Ivy purred, glancing at Lena with a smirk. "How long until you get bored of playing wife? Or should I say, pretending to be one?" The words stung, but Lena didn't flinch. She knew Ivy's cruelty too well. The tension in the room snapped when Damien finally spoke, his voice gruff but loud enough for both women to hear. "I'm not a pawn in your game," he signed to Ivy, his eyes flashing. He turned to Lena next. "I will end this on my terms. I'm not doing this for them." For the first time, Lena saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for her. The way he looked at her made her realize that in his silent way, he had come to care. It wasn't a question anymore. He needed her as much as she needed him. But Ivy wasn't done. She had a vendetta, and no one, especially not Lena, would stand in her way. The next morning, Lena discovered Ivy had already reached out to the press, whispering rumors about her and Damien's unhappy marriage. The headlines flashed across her phone. "Damien Vale's marriage of convenience. Is it a trap for his inherited fortune?" Damien's face twisted in anger when he saw the articles, but instead of confronting Lena, he locked himself away in his study. The media storm intensified, and suddenly every step Lena took was scrutinized. She was no longer just Damien's wife. She was the story, the woman who married a mute heir for money, the woman who would soon be discarded. Lena felt her world crumbling as Ivy's venomous plot began to unfold. The reality was this. The contract was supposed to be business, yes, but the stakes were much higher now. Damien's family, his Aunt Beatrice, who had always silently controlled the Vale Empire, was now watching closely. They wanted Lena gone. They wanted Damien alone. The walls around her were closing in. But now, Lena wasn't running from Damien. She was running toward him. The storm outside matched the chaos within the Vale estate. Every morning, Lena could feel the pressure building as the walls closed in. Ivy's whispers in the media weren't just rumors, they were carefully planted seeds. Every time Lena left the house, she was followed, her every movement photographed. Her life was being dissected, painted as nothing more than a play for wealth. The pressure had a way of making her feel smaller, invisible, like a character in someone else's script. But in the midst of it all, there was Damien. He had retreated further into himself since Ivy's visit. The mansion had grown colder, darker, and their once tentative exchanges became almost non-existent. Lena's heart ached seeing him like this, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. No matter what, she couldn't abandon him to fight his demons alone. It wasn't until late one night, as Lena sat in the study going through some papers, that the door creaked open. She looked up, to see Damien standing there, his silhouette stark against the dim light in the hallway. His usual cold demeanor was gone. He wasn't angry or aloof. He was shattered. There was something raw about the way he looked at her. Vulnerable, desperate even. He stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him. He hesitated, as if unsure of what to say, and then he signed something quickly, his hands moving in the familiar fluid motions. Lena leaned forward to catch every movement. His message was simple, yet it made her heart stop. "Help me fight. I'm not who they say I am." For the first time, Lena saw the truth in his eyes. Damien Vale wasn't just a product of his wealth and family's expectations. He was a man suffocated by the ghosts of his past, caught in the web of a legacy that had never allowed him to breathe. And for the first time, he was asking her to fight with him. The next few days were a blur of whispered conversations, planning, and seeking allies where Lena never thought there were any. She went to Julian Cross, Damien's old friend, someone who had been pushed out of the Vale family's inner circle years ago. Julian had been the one person to stand by Damien when everyone else turned away, but even he had vanished from Damien's life after a bitter falling out. "You really want to help him?" Julian asked, a wry smile tugging at his lips when she appeared at his office. "You do know what you're getting into, right? Damien's no easy person to fix." He looked at her with a mixture of pity and admiration, his eyes lingering on her hands, still trembling from the intensity of the conversation. "But if you care for him, maybe you're the only one who can." Lena didn't have time to waste. She gathered evidence, talked to old employees, sifted through old family records, uncovered secrets that had long been buried. It turned out Damien's deafness wasn't the only thing Ivy had used against him. The family had hidden his mother's death under the guise of an accident. But Lena discovered the truth. It was no accident. She was murdered, and Damien had witnessed it. The trauma of hearing her screams without being able to save her had shattered his soul, and the silence that followed was his attempt to protect himself from the world's cruelty. As Lena pieced the puzzle together, she found herself facing a truth she wasn't prepared for. Ivy wasn't just trying to take over Damien's inheritance, she was trying to destroy him, piece by piece. And now, Lena realized that this was more than a contract. This was a battle for Damien's soul, and she had to fight for him. The next day, she confronted Damien in his office. She laid out the truth. She knew the pain he'd been carrying all these years, the trauma of his mother's death, the suffocating silence that had been forced upon him. His hands trembled as he read the papers she had uncovered, his eyes wide in shock. He was vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. And for the first time, Damien looked at her as if he truly saw her. "I never thought anyone would care enough to dig this deep," he signed slowly, his voice barely a whisper in the silence. "I thought I had to bury it. But you—" He looked up at her with something like hope, a fragile thing buried deep within him. "You make me believe that maybe I don't have to carry it alone." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but she held them back, afraid that if she let go, everything would shatter. "You don't have to anymore. We'll fight together. I won't let you face this alone." As they stood there, two broken people, standing in the ruins of what their lives had become, Lena felt something shift between them. It wasn't just a promise, it was the beginning of something deeper. Something unspoken, yet undeniable. The tension in the Vale estate was palpable, the air thick with the weight of secrets that had finally come to light. Lena felt the shift in Damien, the quiet strength that had always been buried beneath the cold exterior. He no longer just saw her as a wife in name only. He was starting to trust her, confide in her. And for the first time since their marriage, Lena began to feel the fragile spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something real between them. But trust was a fragile thing, and they couldn't afford to be careless. The fight ahead wasn't just about Damien's past, it was about his future. Ivy had already begun her campaign, using every bit of influence she had to discredit Damien, to turn the family and the public against him. And Beatrice Vale, his aunt and the matriarch of the family, was no ally. She had always seen Damien as a threat to her control over the Vale Empire. Now that he was weak, she was moving in for the kill. "Do you think they'll just let you take everything back?" Julian's voice cut through the silence in the study, his hands resting on the back of a chair. "Beatrice isn't going to give up without a fight. She'll use any weapon she can find. And right now, that means you, Lena." Lena flinched at his words. She had hoped that once the truth was out, once Damien's past was uncovered, the family would rally behind him. But Julian was right. This wasn't just a matter of clearing Damien's name. It was a battle for the very soul of the Vale fortune. Damien paced back and forth, his hands fidgeting with the edge of the desk. His thoughts were a whirlwind, each one darker than the last. "I've been running from this for years," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "Hiding in the shadows, hoping no one would notice the cracks. But now they're here, and they won't stop until they break me." Lena stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "No, Damien, they're not going to break you, not if I can help it." She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere, we're in this together." For a moment, Damien didn't respond, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for something, anything, that would confirm what she had just said. Then, without a word, he reached out, taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but in that moment it meant everything. They had no idea what they were up against, but they knew one thing for certain. They couldn't fight this battle alone. The first move came from Beatrice. The old matriarch had long since learned to play her cards with ruthless precision. Lena found the first salvo in her inbox early the next morning. A legal notice from Beatrice's lawyers accusing Damien of mental instability and questioning his ability to manage the Vale assets. The press followed quickly, with stories of Damien's fragile state and Lena's role as his caretaker. The headline screamed, "Damien Vale's incompetence. Is he fit to lead the Empire?" The battle lines had been drawn. But it wasn't just about the press or the family anymore. It was about Damien's dignity and the future they could build together if they survived long enough to get there. Damien slammed his fist against the desk, his frustration building. "They're trying to make me look weak, to turn everything against me, like they did with my mother." His voice trembled, but his eyes were fire. "But I'm not weak. I won't let them destroy everything I've worked for." Lena stepped forward, her resolve solidifying. "We'll fight back. We'll make them see who you really are." But to do that, they would need more than just the truth. They would need allies, and fast. The mansion was quiet in the way cemeteries were, too still, too solemn. Outside, cameras flashed beyond the gates, the media vultures circling for blood. Inside, Lena stood at the threshold of Damien's study, gripping the envelope that could decide everything. The documents in her hands, court evidence, witness accounts, therapy transcripts, were enough to clear Damien's name, to prove Beatrice's decades-long manipulation and the truth of his mother's death. But once released, there would be no turning back. Damien sat at his desk, staring at nothing, his face paler than usual. Since Beatrice had filed her public petition to have him declared legally unfit to run the Vale Empire, he hadn't spoken, not through signs, not with his voice. He had folded into himself, drowning in the fear he had always carried but never voiced. Lina crossed the room slowly and placed the file on the desk. "It's time," she whispered. "We either fight or we let them write the ending." He looked up, and she saw it in his eyes, grief, not for the Empire, but for the boy he used to be, the one who lost his mother, the one no one ever protected. With trembling hands he opened the file. As he read, the silence stretched heavy between them until his fingers moved, signing slowly, "If I lose this, you'll leave me too." Lena's heart cracked at the vulnerability in that single sentence. She stepped closer, kneeling before him. "I never stayed for the money, Damien. I stayed because you're worth fighting for." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "But I can't keep proving it if you don't believe it yourself." Something shattered in him then, not violently, but silently, like glass under pressure. Damien reached for her hand and gripped it tightly. For a long time they just sat there, wounded, exhausted, but no longer alone. It was the first time Lena saw him cry. No sound, just tears, clean and unfiltered, sliding down the cheeks of a man who had learned to bleed quietly. In the days that followed, everything changed. Julian came forward, offering a public statement about the cover-up he had witnessed as Damien's childhood friend. Former staff signed affidavits about Beatrice's threats and coercion. The media pivoted from scandal to sympathy as Lena stood beside Damien at the press conference, holding his hand, her voice shaking as she told the truth. And Damien finally spoke. The world had only heard his voice once, in a business video years ago, but this time he stood before the crowd and said it plainly. "I wasn't broken. I was silenced, but I won't stay silent anymore." Cheers erupted. Tears fell. Even the press stood still. Weeks later, Beatrice's influence dissolved like ash in the wind. Ivy, exposed for her scheming, fled the spotlight, leaving behind nothing but a tarnished name. Damien reclaimed his position, not as the cold heir of the Vale Empire, but as a man who had survived every effort to destroy him. And on the last day of their contract, exactly 1 year since that loveless wedding, Lena stood by the packed suitcase she had prepared. It was time. The deal was over. Damien appeared in the doorway, a bouquet of forget-me-nots in one hand. His voice cracked with emotion as he whispered the only words that ever mattered. "Please, don't leave me." Lena stepped into his arms, tears streaming freely now. "Then asked me to stay, not as your obligation, but as your choice." He cupped her face, signing slowly, even as his voice wavered. "Stay. Because I love you. I've loved you in silence for too long." And she did, not because she had to, but because this time she was wanted, loved, heard.